Marcus sat in the corner booth of the coffee shop, watching groups of friends laugh together at nearby tables. At 32, he had grown accustomed to dining alone, working alone, and spending most evenings in solitude. What once troubled him, the absence of a wide social circle, had transformed into something else entirely. He had begun to recognize patterns in himself that explained not just his limited friendships, but also a deeper truth about his character that most people never discovered about themselves. The revelation came during a particularly difficult period in his career. While his colleagues scrambled to form alliances and seek validation from superiors, Marcus found himself naturally gravitating toward independent solutions. He didn't network at company parties, rarely engaged in office politics, and preferred to let his work speak for itself. His manager once commented, "You're hard to read, Marcus. People don't know where they stand with you." This observation sparked a months-long period of self-reflection that would fundamentally change how Marcus understood himself and others. He began to notice that people with few close friends often possessed characteristics that, while making social connection more challenging, also made them remarkably resilient and authentic individuals. The first hidden characteristic, uncompromising authenticity. The most striking trait Marcus discovered in himself was an inability to present a false version of himself to gain acceptance. While others seemed capable of shifting their personalities depending on the social context, Marcus remained stubbornly himself. This authenticity, while admirable, created friction in social situations where conformity was expected. During university, Marcus had watched his roommate effortlessly adapt his interests, opinions, and even sense of humor to match whatever group he wanted to join. One week he was passionate about environmental activism. The next he was dismissive of tree huggers when trying to impress a different crowd. Marcus envied this social flexibility, but found himself incapable of such adaptation. When colleagues discussed movies they clearly hadn't seen or books they'd never read, Marcus either remained silent or honestly admitted his unfamiliarity. When friends complained about their relationships while making no effort to change destructive patterns, Marcus offered genuine advice rather than empty sympathy. This honesty, while refreshing to some, proved exhausting for others who preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Research in social psychology confirms that authentic individuals often struggle with friendship quantity while excelling in friendship quality. Dr. Susan David's work on emotional authenticity suggests that people who refuse to hide their true selves naturally filter out superficial relationships, leading to fewer but more meaningful connections. The challenge lies in a society that often rewards social chameleons over genuine individuals. Marcus realized that his authenticity served as both a barrier and a filter. It prevented him from accumulating casual friendships but ensured that the relationships he did form were built on solid ground. His few close friends knew exactly who they were dealing with, someone whose word could be trusted, whose opinions were genuinely held, and whose support came without hidden agendas. The second hidden characteristic, intellectual independence. The second trait Marcus identified was his need for intellectual autonomy. He discovered that he rarely adopted others' opinions wholesale, instead preferring to examine ideas from multiple angles before forming his own conclusions. This intellectual independence made him valuable in professional settings but challenging in social ones. At dinner parties, while others bonded over shared political views or popular cultural opinions, Marcus often found himself playing devil's advocate or asking uncomfortable questions. When his book club unanimously praised a best-selling novel, Marcus couldn't help but point out its structural flaws. When friends excitedly discussed a trending documentary, Marcus researched the filmmaker's biases and funding sources. This tendency toward critical thinking created an invisible distance between Marcus and potential friends. People seeking validation for their existing beliefs found him unsettling. Those looking for someone to agree with their complaints about work, relationships, or life found him frustratingly solution-oriented rather than sympathetically supportive. The psychological research on intellectual independence reveals why this trait correlates with smaller social circles. Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments demonstrated that most people will agree with obviously incorrect group opinions to avoid social isolation. Those who consistently resist this pressure, the intellectually independent, naturally find themselves at odds with group consensus. Marcus learned that his intellectual independence wasn't arrogance or contrarianism, but rather a deep-seated need to understand rather than simply belong. He preferred being alone with his thoughts to being surrounded by people whose ideas he couldn't respect. This preference inevitably limited his social options but preserved his intellectual integrity. The third hidden characteristic, Emotional intensity. Perhaps the most isolating trait Marcus discovered in himself was the depth and intensity of his emotional experience. While others seemed capable of casual friendship and light emotional investment, Marcus found himself incapable of superficial connections. When he cared deeply. When he committed fully. This emotional intensity overwhelmed some people and attracted others, but it rarely left anyone neutral. Marcus remembered his college friendship with David, a relationship that exemplified this pattern. While other students juggled multiple casual friendships, Marcus invested heavily in this single connection. He remembered David's important dates, supported him through family crises, and shared his own deepest thoughts and fears. The intensity of Marcus's friendship style eventually overwhelmed David, who began to feel suffocated by the depth of emotional investment Marcus brought to the relationship. This pattern repeated throughout Marcus's life. He formed intense connections that either deepened into lifelong bonds or burned out under the weight of his emotional investment. There seemed to be no middle ground. His friendships were either profound or non-existent. Psychological research on emotional intensity, particularly the work of Dr. Kazimierz Dabrowski on overexcitabilities, suggests that some individuals experience emotions more deeply than others. These individuals often struggle with casual relationships because they cannot modulate their emotional investment to match others' comfort levels. They give too much too quickly, creating imbalance in social dynamics. Marcus learned that his emotional intensity wasn't a flaw, but rather a fundamental aspect of his personality. It meant he would always have fewer friends, but those relationships would be characterized by extraordinary depth and mutual understanding. He stopped apologizing for caring too much and started appreciating those rare individuals who could match his emotional investment. The fourth hidden characteristic: high standards and boundaries. As Marcus continued his self-examination, he recognized another pattern: his unwillingness to tolerate behavior that violated his core values. While others maintained friendships despite significant character differences, Marcus found himself naturally distancing from people whose actions contradicted their stated values or who consistently made choices he couldn't respect. This high standard manifested in various ways. Marcus couldn't maintain close friendships with people who regularly lied to their partners, treated service workers poorly, or consistently broke commitments. While he understood that everyone had flaws, certain behaviors created such cognitive dissonance that continued friendship became impossible. His colleague Sarah exemplified this challenge. Professionally competent and personally charming, Sarah regularly gossiped about other colleagues, took credit for others' work, and made promises she had no intention of keeping. While others in their office maintained friendly relationships with Sarah by overlooking these behaviors, Marcus found himself increasingly uncomfortable with her presence. The psychological concept of cognitive dissonance explains why people with high standards often struggle socially. When someone's behavior conflicts with our values, we experience mental discomfort that can be resolved either by changing our values, changing our perception of their behavior, or distancing ourselves from the person. Most people choose the first two options to maintain social harmony. Marcus consistently chose the third. This unwillingness to compromise his standards meant Marcus's social circle remained small but aligned with his values. He preferred solitude to the company of people whose character he couldn't respect. While this choice limited his options, it preserved his integrity and ensured that his friendships were built on mutual respect and shared values. The fifth hidden characteristic: need for deep conversation. Marcus also discovered that he had little tolerance for small talk and superficial conversation. While others could bond over weather, sports, or celebrity gossip, Marcus craved discussions about ideas, values, and meaningful experiences. This preference for depth over breadth in conversation naturally limited his social compatibility. At networking events, Marcus watched others effortlessly navigate light conversations, building rapport through shared interests in popular culture or casual observations about current events. Meanwhile, Marcus struggled to engage in discussions that felt meaningless to him. He wanted to know what people really thought about life, what challenges they faced, what they'd learned from their mistakes, and what they hoped to achieve. This need for meaningful conversation created awkward social dynamics. People often felt that Marcus was too intense or too serious. His attempts to deepen casual conversations made others uncomfortable, while their preference for light interaction left him feeling disconnected and frustrated. Research on conversation styles reveals that individuals who prefer deep, meaningful discussions often score higher on measures of introversion and openness to experience. They find casual interaction draining rather than energizing, and seek conversations that provide intellectual stimulation or emotional connection. This preference naturally reduces their compatibility with the broader population, who generally prefer lighter social interactions. Marcus learned to appreciate this aspect of his personality rather than fight it. He stopped forcing himself to engage in small talk and instead sought environments and relationships where deeper conversation was valued. This shift reduced his social anxiety and increased the quality of his interactions, even if it further limited their quantity. The sixth hidden characteristic: independence and self-reliance. Another trait Marcus identified was his strong need for independence and self-reliance. While others sought emotional support, practical help, or validation from their social networks, Marcus instinctively handled challenges alone. This independence, while making him remarkably resilient, also made him less dependent on friendships for basic emotional and practical needs. Marcus rarely called friends when facing problems, preferring to work through challenges independently. When his car broke down, he researched solutions rather than asking for rides. When facing difficult decisions, he analyzed options alone rather than seeking others' opinions. When feeling lonely or sad, he addressed these emotions through solitary activities rather than social connection. This self-reliance created a paradox in his friendships. While it made him a valuable friend, someone who offered support without needing reciprocal help, it also made him seem distant and unneedy. Others struggled to understand how to contribute to his life when he rarely asked for help or showed vulnerability. Psychological research on attachment styles suggests that highly independent individuals often developed secure attachment through early experiences that taught them to rely primarily on themselves. While this creates resilience and self-sufficiency, it can also limit intimacy by preventing the mutual dependence that characterizes close friendships. Marcus realized that his independence, while serving him well professionally and personally, created barriers to friendship formation. People bond through mutual support and vulnerability, but his reluctance to need others limited these bonding opportunities. He began to understand that occasionally allowing others to help him wasn't weakness but rather an investment in relationship depth. The seventh hidden characteristic: comfort with solitude. The final trait Marcus recognized was his genuine comfort with being alone. Unlike many people who experienced solitude as loneliness and actively sought social stimulation, Marcus found solitude restorative and enjoyable. He could spend entire weekends alone without feeling isolated or depressed, a capacity that reduced his motivation to maintain large social networks. This comfort with solitude manifested in various ways. Marcus enjoyed solo travels, solo dining, and solo entertainment. He looked forward to quiet evenings at home and felt no compulsion to fill every free moment with social activity. When friends cancelled plans, he often felt relieved rather than disappointed. Research on solitude preference indicates that individuals who genuinely enjoy being alone are often more creative, self-aware, and emotionally regulated than those who fear solitude. However, this comfort with aloneness also reduces the social motivation that drives others to build and maintain friendships. Marcus understood that his enjoyment of solitude wasn't antisocial behavior, but rather a fundamental aspect of his temperament. He recharged through quiet time rather than social interaction, found peace in his own company, and didn't experience the loneliness that motivates many people to seek constant social connection. Part 2. The Crucible of Transformation. Understanding these 7 characteristics provided Marcus with crucial self-knowledge, but it also presented a profound challenge. If these traits naturally limited his friendships, and if he was unwilling to change fundamental aspects of his personality to gain social acceptance, how could he build a fulfilling life? The answer lay not in becoming someone else, but in becoming the strongest version of himself. The transformation began during what Marcus later called his crucible period. 18 months of professional and personal challenges that stripped away his remaining illusions about himself and others. His company downsized, eliminating his position despite excellent performance reviews. His long-term relationship ended when his partner admitted she found his intensity exhausting. His father was diagnosed with a serious illness, requiring Marcus to become a caregiver while managing his own crisis. During this period, Marcus discovered the truth embedded in the ancient philosophical principle: the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. The challenges he faced weren't destroying him. They were revealing which aspects of himself were truly essential, and which were merely habits or fears disguised as personality traits. Identifying the weak self. The first step in Marcus's transformation involved distinguishing between his authentic characteristics and his weaknesses masquerading as strengths. He realized that some traits he had attributed to his personality were actually manifestations of fear, insecurity, or limiting beliefs. His authenticity, for example, sometimes crossed into rigidity, while refusing to present false versions of himself was admirable. His inflexibility about others' different approaches to life sometimes reflected narrow-mindedness rather than integrity. Marcus began to understand the difference between staying true to his core values and being unnecessarily judgmental about choices that didn't affect him. His intellectual independence, while valuable, occasionally became intellectual arrogance. The need to form his own opinions was important, but dismissing others' perspectives without genuine consideration reflected insecurity rather than strength. Marcus learned to distinguish between healthy skepticism and defensive contrarianism. His emotional intensity remained authentic, but his expectation that others match his level of investment was unrealistic. The weak part of this trait was his inability to accept that people could care differently while still caring genuinely. Marcus began to appreciate various forms of friendship rather than demanding that all relationships meet his specific emotional requirements. His high standards were generally beneficial, but sometimes he used them to avoid vulnerability. It was easier to reject others for failing to meet his standards than to risk being rejected himself. Marcus recognized that some of his boundary setting was actually self-protection disguised as principled behavior. His preference for deep conversation was authentic, but his discomfort with lighter interactions sometimes reflected social anxiety rather than genuine disinterest. Marcus learned that meaningful relationships often began with casual connections, and his dismissal of small talk sometimes prevented deeper bonds from forming. His independence was largely healthy, but his reluctance to show vulnerability or ask for help sometimes stemmed from fear of rejection rather than genuine self-sufficiency. The weak aspect of his independence was his assumption that needing others made him weak. His comfort with solitude was genuine, but sometimes he used it to avoid the challenges of human connection. The weak part wasn't his enjoyment of alone time, but his occasional use of solitude as an escape from the work required to build and maintain relationships. The process of destruction and reconstruction. Armed with this understanding, Marcus began the difficult process of destroying his weak self while preserving his authentic strengths. This wasn't about becoming more social or changing his fundamental nature, but rather about eliminating the fear-based limitations that prevented him from living fully as himself. The destruction began with his career crisis. Losing his job forced Marcus to confront his attachment to external validation. He had always prided himself on not needing others' approval, but unemployment revealed his subtle dependence on professional recognition for self-worth. The weak self that defined value through job titles and salary figures had to be eliminated. Marcus spent weeks in genuine solitude. Not the comfortable chosen solitude he enjoyed, but the forced isolation that comes with major life disruption. During this period, he faced uncomfortable truths about himself. His independence wasn't as complete as he believed. He had been dependent on routine, familiar environments, and predictable social roles to maintain his sense of identity. The reconstruction process required Marcus to rebuild his self-concept on more solid foundations. Instead of deriving identity from what he did or how others perceived him, he began to understand himself through his core values, his capacity for growth, and his ability to maintain integrity under pressure. His authenticity evolved from rigid self-presentation to flexible genuineness. He learned to express his true thoughts and feelings while remaining open to others' perspectives. His authenticity became less about being right and more about being real. His intellectual independence transformed from defensive questioning to curious inquiry. Rather than automatically challenging others' ideas to prove his intellectual superiority, Marcus began asking questions to genuinely understand different viewpoints. His independence became collaborative rather than oppositional. His emotional intensity remained strong but became more skillfully applied. Instead of expecting everyone to match his emotional investment immediately, Marcus learned to gradually deepen relationships at a pace that respected others' comfort levels. His intensity became an invitation rather than a demand. His standards remained high but became more wisely applied. Marcus learned to distinguish between core character issues and personal differences. He maintained boundaries around behavior that genuinely harmed others while becoming more accepting of different lifestyle choices and personality styles. His preference for meaningful conversation remained, but he developed appreciation for the role of lighter interaction in building trust and comfort. Marcus discovered that small talk often served as a gentle entry point to deeper connection, and his dismissal of it had prevented many potentially meaningful relationships from developing. His independence evolved into interdependence, the ability to be self-reliant while remaining open to connection and collaboration. He learned that true strength included the capacity to give and receive support appropriately. His comfort with solitude remained, but was balanced with intentional connection. Marcus learned to use solitude for restoration and reflection while actively creating opportunities for meaningful human interaction. Testing the new foundation. The true test of Marcus's transformation came when he began dating again. Sarah was unlike anyone he had previously been attracted to, socially confident, emotionally expressive, and comfortable with a wide circle of casual friends. In the past, Marcus might have dismissed her as superficial or incompatible with his preference for depth and authenticity. Instead, his reconstructed self allowed him to appreciate Sarah's different approach to relationships without needing to change her or himself. He discovered that her social ease complemented his depth. Her emotional expressiveness balanced his intensity, and her wide social network provided perspectives that enriched his more focused worldview. The relationship challenged Marcus in ways that revealed the strength of his new foundation. When Sarah's friends initially found him intimidating or overly serious, Marcus didn't retreat into defensive superiority. Instead, he made genuine efforts to connect while remaining authentically himself. He learned to engage in casual conversation not as meaningless chatter, but as a way of showing care for others' experiences. When conflicts arose, as they inevitably do in any honest relationship, Marcus discovered that his authentic self could engage with disagreement without defensiveness. His intellectual independence allowed him to consider Sarah's perspective seriously, while maintaining his own viewpoints. His emotional intensity became a source of passion and commitment rather than overwhelming pressure. Most importantly, Marcus learned that destroying his weak self didn't mean eliminating his distinctive characteristics, but rather purifying them of fear, insecurity, and limiting beliefs. He remained someone who would always have fewer friends, prefer deeper conversations, and need regular solitude. But these traits were now expressions of strength rather than defensive mechanisms. Part 3. The Unshakable Foundation. 2 years after beginning his transformation, Marcus understood the profound truth that had always existed within him, but had been obscured by societal expectations and his own limitations. The person who fully accepts and develops their authentic nature becomes truly unshakable, not because they avoid challenges or criticism, but because they no longer depend on external validation for their sense of worth and identity. The paradox of social connection through self-acceptance. The most surprising outcome of Marcus's journey was that accepting his naturally limited social needs actually improved his relationships. By stopping his attempts to be more social than felt natural, he became more present and valuable in the connections he did maintain. His friendship with James exemplified this transformation. James had been a casual acquaintance for years, someone Marcus saw occasionally through work connections but never pursued a deeper relationship with because James seemed to represent everything Marcus thought he should be but wasn't. Effortlessly social, popular, and comfortable with surface-level interaction. After his transformation, Marcus approached James with genuine curiosity rather than defensive comparison. He discovered that James's social confidence masked deep insecurities about authenticity and meaning. James was tired of managing multiple superficial relationships and longed for the kind of genuine connection that Marcus offered naturally. Their friendship deepened not because Marcus became more like James, but because Marcus's comfort with his authentic self created space for James to be more authentic as well. James began to value quality over quantity in his relationships, while Marcus learned to appreciate the social skills that James brought to their friendship. This pattern repeated in Marcus's other relationships. His authenticity gave others permission to be genuine. His intellectual independence encouraged more thoughtful discussion. His emotional depth created opportunities for meaningful connection. His high standards challenged others to grow, while his acceptance of different approaches prevented judgment from becoming rejection. Professional transformation. Marcus's career recovery demonstrated how personal authenticity translates into professional strength. Instead of seeking another corporate position where he would need to navigate complex office politics and maintain relationships that felt forced, Marcus started a consulting practice that leveraged his analytical abilities and genuine desire to solve problems. His limited social network actually became an advantage. The few professional relationships he maintained were based on mutual respect and proven competence rather than casual networking. When clients needed his expertise, they hired him for his skills and integrity, not his ability to charm at company events. His authenticity became a valuable differentiator in a market saturated with consultants who promised whatever clients wanted to hear. Marcus offered honest assessments, realistic timelines, and solutions based on careful analysis rather than popular trends. His intellectual independence allowed him to provide perspectives that clients couldn't get from consultants who simply validated their existing approaches. His emotional intensity translated into passionate commitment to client success. While other consultants maintained professional distance, Marcus genuinely invested in solving his clients' problems. This intensity, properly channeled, created extraordinary loyalty and results. His high standards ensured that he only took on projects where he could make genuine contributions. Rather than accepting any work to build his client base, Marcus carefully selected assignments that matched his expertise and values. This selectivity led to better outcomes and stronger professional relationships. The romantic relationship Marcus's relationship with Sarah continued to deepen, demonstrating how authentic self-acceptance creates the foundation for genuine intimacy. Their differences, which might have created conflict in Marcus's previous relationships, became sources of mutual growth and enrichment. Sarah's social confidence helped Marcus engage more comfortably in group settings when he chose to participate. She didn't try to make him more social, but her ease with people created a bridge between Marcus and others that hadn't existed before. Meanwhile, Marcus's preference for meaningful conversation gradually influenced their social circle toward more substantive interactions. Their different approaches to friendship complemented each other perfectly. Sarah maintained a wide network of casual friends who enriched their social life with diverse perspectives and experiences. Marcus provided the emotional depth and intellectual stimulation that Sarah craved but hadn't found in her more casual relationships. Most importantly, Sarah appreciated Marcus exactly as he was, someone who would always need solitude, prefer small gatherings to large parties, and invest deeply in a few relationships rather than maintaining many superficial ones. Her acceptance of his authentic nature allowed Marcus to contribute his strengths to the relationship without feeling pressure to become someone else. The philosophy of unshakability. Through his journey, Marcus discovered that true unshakability comes not from avoiding challenges or criticism, but from building identity on foundations that cannot be destroyed by external circumstances. The weak self that depends on others' approval, external validation, or unchanging circumstances will always be vulnerable. The authentic self that draws strength from internal sources becomes genuinely resilient. His 7 characteristics: authenticity, intellectual independence, emotional intensity, high standards, preference for meaningful conversation, independence, and comfort with solitude, were not obstacles to overcome but strengths to develop. When purified of fear and insecurity, these traits became sources of extraordinary resilience and value. Marcus learned that authenticity isn't about being inflexible or refusing to grow, but about remaining true to core values while adapting to circumstances. His authenticity became a compass that guided decision-making and behavior regardless of social pressure or external expectations. His intellectual independence evolved into wisdom, the ability to think clearly under pressure, analyze complex situations objectively, and make decisions based on evidence and values rather than popular opinion or emotional manipulation. His emotional intensity became a source of passion and commitment that enriched his relationships and work. Rather than overwhelming others, his depth created opportunities for meaningful connection with those capable of matching his investment. His high standards became discernment, the ability to distinguish between what deserved his time and energy and what didn't. This discernment protected his resources while ensuring that his commitments were genuine and valuable. His preference for meaningful conversation became a gift he offered to others, the opportunity to be heard, understood, and engaged with on topics that mattered to them. His conversations became catalysts for others' thinking and growth. His independence became interdependence, the ability to stand alone when necessary while remaining open to collaboration and connection when beneficial. This balance created strength that enhanced rather than competed with his relationships. His comfort with solitude became a renewable resource that allowed him to maintain perspective, process experiences, and return to social interaction with energy and insight. The ripple effects Marcus's transformation affected everyone around him in ways he never anticipated. His authenticity challenged others to examine their own relationships between their true selves and their social personas. Friends and colleagues began to question whether their extensive social networks were providing genuine satisfaction or merely filling time and avoiding deeper self-examination. James, inspired by Marcus's example, began reducing his social commitments to focus on relationships that provided real value and enjoyment. He discovered that his fear of loneliness had driven him to maintain friendships that drained rather than energized him. Sarah found that Marcus's depth and authenticity elevated the quality of her own relationships. His influence gradually shifted her social circle toward people who could engage in meaningful conversation and genuine connection. Marcus's clients began to value his honest assessments over more diplomatic but less useful feedback from other consultants. His willingness to deliver uncomfortable truths when necessary led to better business outcomes and stronger professional relationships. Even casual acquaintances were affected by Marcus's transformation. His genuine presence in conversations, his thoughtful questions, and his authentic interest in others created memorable interactions that influenced how people approached their own social connections. The ultimate truth, as Marcus reflected on his journey, he understood that the ancient wisdom about destroying the weak self to become unshakable wasn't about becoming invulnerable to all challenges or criticisms. Instead, it was about building an identity so firmly rooted in authentic values and genuine self-knowledge that external pressures couldn't shake the fundamental foundation. People with few friends who possess the 7 hidden characteristics aren't socially deficient or emotionally damaged. They are individuals whose authentic natures naturally filter for quality over quantity in relationships. When they learn to embrace these characteristics as strengths rather than limitations, they become extraordinarily valuable to those capable of appreciating depth, authenticity, and genuine connection. The man who destroys his weak self, the parts driven by fear, insecurity, and a desperate need for approval, discovers that his authentic self is already equipped with everything necessary for a fulfilling life. The characteristics that limit his social circle become the very traits that make him unshakable in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Marcus's few close friends weren't a consolation prize for social inadequacy. They were the natural result of his authentic approach to life. His preference for solitude wasn't antisocial behavior. It was the foundation of his self-knowledge and emotional stability. His high standards weren't judgmental perfectionism. They were the boundaries that protected his integrity and energy. In a world that often rewards superficial charm over genuine character, people like Marcus serve an essential function. They remind others that depth is valuable, that authenticity matters, and that meaningful connection is worth more than popular acceptance. They demonstrate that strength comes from within, that resilience is built through self-acceptance, and that the approval of the many is less valuable than the respect of the few who truly understand. The journey from feeling isolated by his distinctive characteristics to recognizing them as sources of strength transformed Marcus from someone who apologized for his authentic nature to someone who celebrated it. He learned that being unshakable didn't mean being unmovable, but rather being rooted so deeply in truth that external storms couldn't uproot his fundamental sense of self. This transformation is available to anyone willing to undertake the difficult work of examining their true nature, destroying the aspects of self built on fear and limitation, and rebuilding on foundations of authentic strength. The process is challenging because it requires abandoning the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about who we should be and accepting the sometimes uncomfortable truths about who we actually are. But for those brave enough to complete this journey, the reward is extraordinary, a life lived from a position of genuine strength. Relationships built on truth rather than convenience, and an unshakable foundation that can weather any storm life might bring. The man who destroys his weak self doesn't become invulnerable. He becomes authentic, and in a world full of people trying to be someone else, authenticity is the rarest and most valuable strength of all.